Okay, so let me kind of readjust this. Sorry. Alrighty. Closer. Actually, let me turn around. Okay. Oh, much better. Much better. All right. So, last week, and I actually turned the camera around so I can actually see the comments this time. On the other video, I had it turned around. Shabbat Shalom. Last week, we talked about womb trauma, and we talked about rape and molestation. And because I mentioned in the video that there are stages to this, and because of being someone who has also been in similar situations that we discussed last week, I felt like it would be imperative to follow up not only with that discussion, but more importantly with healing through Torah that goes along with that discussion. And so this week we're going to talk about Yah revealing himself as a healer when it comes to rape and molestation specifically, but when it comes to the nation of people as a whole. Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so I want to start with kind of debriefing from last week. So the cloth I wear, so this cloth actually has my fringes on it. So I have like actual tassels, and they are on some of my clothing, but when I am doing something, I'm like, oh, this doesn't have anything on it, but it was the closest thing to me. I'll just grab this. So it looks like this. And it's actually pretty big. So in the wintertime, it actually is very warm. But I made it. I made it out of raw linen and, or I guess unprocessed linen, and literally sewed it up on the sides. It's like one of my first projects when I was learning how to sew, which is still a process. And so I can throw it on when I'm getting ready to go to work in the morning. Right now I'm working in Arizona, so I am not throwing this on because it's 100,000,000 degrees. But I just wear my regular, either my tassels that are safety pinned on, they can safety pin onto my clothes, or ones that are already on my garments. Yeah, so yeah, that hopefully that helps. Okay, so we're gonna talk about Yah revealing himself as healer, and I put the word on the intro, and the word is Rapha. So in Hebrew it's spelled Resh Pei Aleph, and somebody's in Vegas, oh, literally whoever you are in Vegas, email me, like stat, anybody who's in Vegas, but email me, we need to talk. Okay, Resh Pei Aleph and Resh Pei Hey. The reason why we're dealing with the healing part, like I mentioned in the beginning, is because when you open up wounds, you have to apply the healing. Last week I spoke to a few women, and then during the week as well, who had been through rape, molestation, or just abuse in general. And a lot of us have suppressed a lot of those feelings and a lot of those traumas. And one of my friends that I spoke with, dear sister of mine, who is in the profession of social healing, shared with me how opening up those wounds and that trauma can be traumatic for a lot of people, because they can't process what they've suppressed. And so because a lot of the emotions are suppressed or compartmentalized, when you trigger them, you bring them to the forefront. So we're going to talk about those triggers, We're going to talk about healing, and we're going to talk about repentance for a lot of the actions that took place because of the trauma of our own, a lot of the rebellion and the actions that took place, and how to literally close the doors to that process. Okay, so the theme, I guess, for this, because I always want to connect whatever we do, especially in the form of healing, to Torah, the theme of it will be the Exodus. And I know initially that sounds crazy, because what does Exodus have to do with healing from trauma? Well, it has a lot to do with healing from trauma, because our ancestors have already shown us, and in dealing with our ancestors, have shown us the pattern of healing when coming out of a nation of lots of negative things, and how we are to heal from that. Okay, so literally we're going to go to Exodus 15:26, but I want to tell you that as a people who are enslaved, there is a collective part of our slavery that also has a lot to do with our condition. So we are constantly, and the reason why I chose Exodus is because we're constantly coming out of enslavement because of brokenness. So there are levels of enslavement to come out of. Most of us have come out of the mental slavery, the mental religious slavery. But coming out of the mental religious slavery also waters the weed seeds that have been planted during that captivity mentally into the oppressive systems of this nation and the religion that's attached to the greater global system of the beast, if you want to put it like that, or Babylon. Okay, so we're going to look at 15:26, and this is when Yah comes to Moshe, and it literally says, and he cried unto Yahuwah, and Yahuwah showed him a tree which he had cast into the waters, and the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. Okay, so if you're not familiar with this, this is Mara, when they run into the bitter waters in the wilderness. Okay, so they have already been left out of the land, but they had already left out of Egypt, and in leaving out of Egypt, they still encountered situations that further proved them, our ancestors, as a people. And so for us who have experienced emotional and physical trauma, you have come out of mental slavery, but in coming out of mental slavery into this walk, into the wilderness sometimes of this walk, you are now experiencing the places of bitter waters. So I am definitely coming a little different than you probably have seen this, but to apply it to what we're going through, you'll see why it makes sense. So a lot of us are at the Mara portion. And if we go up to verse 24, let's actually go to 22. So they've crossed the Red Sea, and so 22. So Moshe brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days into the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Mara, they could not drink the waters of Mara, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Mara, which literally means bitter. And the people murmured against Moshe, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried unto Yahuwah, and Yahuwah showed him a tree which he had cast into the waters, and the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. And said, if thou shalt diligently hearken to the voice of Yahuwah thy Elohim, and will do thou which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am Yahuwah that healeth thee. And so it's literally Yahuwah Rapha. And the reason why this is important in the process of healing is because Yah tells the people the condition, because in Christianity we're not given, or in modern day religion, we're not giving the condition to which our healing comes. So many of us are looking for healing outside of the position where healing is being applied. It's just like getting your leg cut off and going to the auto shop. The auto shop does not know how to put your leg back on. You have to go to the hospital, find a surgeon to put your leg back on. A lot of us who are transitioning or who are even in this truth are going toward places, camps and other things, looking for healing, and those places are not providing healing for our people, especially our women. You're coming into further oppressed situations where broken people are ministering to broken people, because the first stage of leaving out of the wilderness was being proved. And a lot of people are not being proved in all things before they step up and then teach people. And so, especially for women, there is an extreme lack of women's services for healing that don't make us the cause of the issue. There are causes that have stemmed from abuse that are being perpetuated in our women, but that are not necessarily the true characteristics of our women. And so in a lot of camps, I hear them dealing with a lot of whoredom, and women are whores, and women need to do this, and they need to change this about their clothes, and they need to change this about the way they talk, and they need to change this about the way they wear their hair. But we haven't gotten to the point where we actually heal what was motivating the behaviors or motivating the self-image or the lack of positive self-image amongst our women. And a lot of that is the abuse that is very, very prevalent within our community. So prevalent to the point that once every 107 seconds, a woman is molested or raped. That is way, way, way too high for it not to be something that's dealt with, especially within the community of the Hebrew Israelite people. Okay, so when Yah meets Moses, he doesn't only meet him to make him a leader, but he also shows him how he's going to heal the people. So last week we talked about trauma, and this week we'll look at the first steps. This is not going to be the final conversation. Actually, I believe it'll probably be a more ongoing conversation, because we're all at different stages of our healing. And I feel like as a person who has a that was a really good point. As a person who has a platform, I need to use it for the healing of our women. One of the sisters just brought up the fact that they don't only seek it in camps, but also relationships. And that is a point that we're going to touch today. But just because you mentioned it, let's jump into that. So literally, relationships are normally gone into because we think we're going to find healing in there. If you haven't watched the video of Have Sex Responsibly, a lot of that video deals with that topic of those relationships that we enter into and what we're expecting in those relationships. So I won't dive deeply into that, but I will encourage you to go look at that video, because it really covers the expectation that a lot of us have for our men when we enter into relationships, and how a lot of the times we're not able to properly convey that because we haven't fully gone through and healed from our hurt. So we're looking for literally a partner sometimes for us who loves us to actually help us through that. Yes, you do. I don't know how to do it. I would literally give you my password right now. I don't even know how to modify things or how to modify comments while I am oh, here we go. Okay, I'm just gonna kindly block a couple of people while we're talking. Okay, all right, yeah, because I was literally getting a little distracted, and that's nothing but the adversary. So and a lot of times we don't see, because as a people and as women, we are strong by definition. I know that's a term that is used a lot for us, but it's not. It became a term for a lot of us that brings a lot of negative connotation, because it means that we can handle a lot of trauma. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna add my dear sister here as a moderator. Perfect. Okay, so now I can focus. Okay, so a lot of times we're told that we're strong, and in strength we perpetuate a lot of the, or we suppress, a lot of the feelings that are caused by the trauma, even within relationships, and then we allow those to be repeated. I know this is not a term that we like to admit, but I'm going to be the first to admit it, and then so that it doesn't seem like I'm calling out anyone, but low self-esteem. Because we are a very forward nation and of women, and because we are a very strong nation of women, we don't see a lot of those traits being masked or being used to mask low self-esteem. And when we have low self-esteem, it doesn't always show up in the sense that we are weak women, but it also shows up a lot in our strength and in a lot of the ways that we fail to heal ourselves. And a lot of that is played upon because although we don't realize it, when we choose our partners or when we choose the men that we want to be with, we choose them from the purest part of ourselves and from the most unmasked part of ourselves, which also often resonates a frequency of low self-esteem, thus drawing to us men who tend to add to the hurt and pain rather than healing it. Because to be vulnerable is imperative in a relationship where and it's imperative for men who are looking for a woman who they want to be with. Yes, and some of them do feed on it and use it for their own benefit. That is so true. Okay, so one of the quotes that I found when I was going through this is, the real exile of Israel is that they learned to endure it. And for so many of us, the real exile of trauma is that we learn to endure that trauma. Because of that low self-esteem masks strength, we stay in situations and we endure those situations. And as a nation of people, we endured the captivity in Egypt, and in thinking it made us strong, it actually caused a lot of problems. And so for many of us who have gone through this, we so often hide, mask, and cover our hurt, thus causing us to endure right. And so one of the sisters just pointed out that so let me finish my statement. We endure those situations because we don't really know how to deal with it. Okay, so one of the sisters pointed out that sometimes this trauma could have happened as a small child, and some don't even realize why they act out as male and females. And this is so true, which literally leads me to my very first point. My first point is tagged, don't forget. Acknowledging begins the healing. And so many people don't want to revisit because as a people who have been submerged into Western culture, we have been taught that time is linear. I mean, that time moves from one point to another point. So as we're moving, that time is now, that happened before is behind us. And it doesn't matter and it doesn't dictate how we live our lives, because what matters is what's before us. But Hebraically, not only is time cyclical, but in the cyclical path, the path that has been trodden is now in front of us. So those things that have happened to us should be seen clearly, thus governing how we carry ourselves moving into time. I am going to touch on that, sis, on forgiveness of ourselves. So so often we choose to compartmentalize and forget. And I remember taking a psychology class, and I don't agree with a lot of things, mainly probably none of them, with modern psychology. But the way the mind compartmentalizes is very important. When things that are extremely traumatic happen, especially as a young age, they are not forgotten. They are compartmentalized. And they are compartmentalized, and once they are compartmentalized, the only way we experience those traumas that are compartmentalized is through triggers. And those triggers can be things such as the way something smells, certain music, certain way people touch us, the certain way people talk to us, the way we react when people handle our children. And so while we think that those things are gone or have been dealt with or no longer a part of us, or even if we can't even remember why we are motivated by those behaviors, they are being acted out in our conscience based upon what has been suppressed in our subconscious. So yes, last week when I talked about this, I hope that for a lot of people, when those things did come up, exactly, flashbacks, when they did come up, I hope that instead of re-suppressing them, we think all the way through. I remember growing up not being able to fully think through what happened because somehow I felt like it wasn't true, or maybe I had watched it somewhere or seen it like on TV, because so much of it just didn't seem like something that would happen to me, because I had cultivated a life for myself, an identity for myself by the time I was 16 or 17 that did not mirror a person that had been abused. I was very outgoing. I was very talkative. I didn't really replicate any of the behaviors that I thought were perpetuated by women who had been abused. But when I started to look back on things and began to talk and to share and to talk to family and friends, I saw that very early on I had begun to have behaviors that tied to my abuse, but that as parents and as family members, they normally suppress those things by either whoopings or by, you don't do that, or you don't say that, or you don't act out that way. And so it was a further suppression. And so to add to that, by not forgetting, also remember to, if you have or encounter a person who's experiencing that, or children who are experiencing behaviors, before we chastise our children, we need to first get to the root of behavior, because we can stop the behavior, but we never get to the root of why the behavior started. And it's the same thing for adults. So so back to the do not forget. One of the things in scripture that is completely told over and over again is the Haggadah, and I'll get to that word again, but it's literally the idea of the slave narrative. As a Hebrew people, we constantly repeat our slave narrative, and it has throughout scripture, we saw that the repeating of the slave narrative, or the time in Egypt, caused our people to be able to never forget that. Even when they would go astray, they could always remember how they had been brought out of that situation. And the same is for us as a nation now. The reason why they suppress the slave narrative here in America is because by suppressing the slave narrative, they suppress the voice of the slave, thus causing further mental trauma. So when it comes to, I'm giving you 3 cycles. So when it comes to trauma and rape and molestation, one of the things that we lose right away is our voice. The first thing you stop doing is you stop speaking. You stop advocating for yourself. You start to blame yourself, thus losing your voice and your opportunity to tell the narrative of what happened to you. Because part of telling the narrative keeps you conscious of the act, thus causing you not to perpetuate the behaviors based upon the act. Okay, so next, and I'm gonna go back to that. Second, what happens to you does not define who you are. And that's a big thing, because when things like that are traumatic happen, they often perpetuate. It's not like it happens one time and it stops. But once it happens, you believe that it's okay to now allow it in other forms, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in marriage. You know, you feel like you can't say no ever, because one of the things that happened with a nameless situation, not directly attached to me, but there was a situation where a young lady who had been put into a situation where she had been made to feel like she wanted the sexual advancement, thus leading to molestation by my definition, maybe not by hers, but because of the age gap in the relationship and because of the manipulation within the relationship, I believe it was molestation. And one of the things after dealing with that situation with the young lady, I shared with her that you need to know that it's okay to say no. Because so often as women, when we deal with rape and molestation or just advancements from men, when we enter in relationships with other men that we actually fall in love with, and we want to wait to have sex, or we want to wait to express physical contact until we're married, we feel like we can't do so because we've already done these things. And once again, lose our voice. It's like, well, I didn't love this person who took this from me, but now I love this person. So I feel like I have the choice to choose to do this with this person where I did not before. And that's often a really big thing for a lot of young women, maybe not for a lot of older women. I don't have that experience. But I know that a lot of women have that issue of waiting or taking time back to themselves to heal after coming out of either abusive relationships or relationships where sex was involved, because so much of our culture is very, very much sexually motivated. So knowing that what happened in past relationships, or even what you did in past relationships, does not define how you have to act in the future. And I'll follow up with that one as well. Third, healing comes by sharing with others. As a people, we have been taught to suppress and not talk about our experiences, whether it is through slavery all the way up to rape and molestation and abuse, whether it's physical or mental. I think I should put that in, because not everybody experiences physical abuse, but mental abuse is just as traumatizing. And so by sharing your experience with others, it gives it gives other people a voice, because feeling like you're all alone, or feeling like you're the only person, or even feeling like you earned it or deserved it, or that's what you get because that's what abusers tell people, it muffles the voice. So when other people share, it gives a voice back to other women. I also want to point out something that a lot of people may not have direct experience with, but it will speak to someone because it's coming to my mind. When you experience sexual trauma as a child, there's something that is awakened within you. And I know a lot of women don't speak out about it because you begin to enjoy it. And I know that sounds very, very, very strange probably to some people, but once you begin to provoke a feeling and a sexual feeling, that feeling now has to keep being fed. And I know a lot of women who have probably not experienced trauma but have gone through periods of abstinence in their lives, especially when coming into this truth. You know better than a lot of people that waking up love before it's time. Exactly. You know better than probably most that when you begin to stop, for a while you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do this, but then certain things trigger that feeling, and then you chase that feeling. And I want to bring that up because a lot of predators play on the fact that once that feeling is awakened, it's hard to suppress it when you don't understand what it is. And so that's something I also wanted to bring up, because just because a person made you feel like that's what you also wanted, if it was not entered into with the mind of consent, and if it was not entered into through the avenues that Yah has set forth for that physical contact to be entered into, then it created and awakened things that should not have been awakened before their time. And so that's also something that has to be fought in women who have experienced that. So once again, that's another thing, finding your triggers. I grew up with a mother who had experienced trauma, and I remember not being able to hug my mom certain ways, but my mom was very, very, very vocal about things that made her uncomfortable because of her situation. she became very vocal, which also helped me to be very vocal. And I just want to point out the fact that my mother had nothing to do, obviously, with my trauma. It was isolated into another area and into another person's care. So I wanted to point that out because my mom was very, very vocal about trauma. So she was very, very open about smells she didn't like. We couldn't wear certain perfumes. My brothers couldn't wear certain colognes. But one of the things that I think was not dealt with is why. She told us why she didn't like it, but not so much as the fact that these things were triggers, and to walk through how to deal away with triggers, because sometimes those triggers can really, really motivate a lot of things in our lives. Men who will repeat the cycle. Sometimes we as women seek out men unknowingly that perpetuate the cycle of trauma, and we invite them into our homes because we have become attracted to a certain type of man that we feel like fits us. But a lot of what they're fitting is the frequency of our insecurity, our low self-esteem, and we invite them into our homes. And then we also perpetuate that trauma. And so I just wanted to point out to women who are looking for men, especially men who are even Hebrew men, and if you have children, to not just take anything for face value, because while that trauma may not be perpetuated in the physical sense, because you have experienced trauma and because you're a woman who may have children, there has been abuse amongst the Hebrew community of women by either demeaning them to a lower status or telling them what they don't deserve in a man, or that they have to not want certain things out of a relationship because of either having had children or been in relationships or having experienced trauma. So I want to just point that out there. If those are the avenues into which you are entering into a relationship with a man, especially a Hebrew man, that is a sign to not enter into that relationship, because you and that person have not dealt with some trauma. And to enter into a relationship with a man who has now validated his negative views of women who have been in trauma, or women who have been in premarital relationships, by lowering their status as a woman, that shouldn't be the case. And we can talk about that further if anybody would like to. But anyways, going back to the retelling and masking. Actually, I'm going to skip retelling for one more. Masking, healing, and religion. Just because you come into this truth does not mean that you are healed. Just because they left Egypt did not mean that our ancestors were healed. Our ancestors had a long road, and clearly we're still on that road to healing. Some were healed during the process because of their willingness to surrender and repent, but some of them were not. And so just because you've come into the knowledge or truth of who you are does not mean that you have also come into full healing. The process of healing is a gradual process that goes through stages, because you have gone through stages in your life where you have been where you've been broken, and so you have to be healed through each of those stages. And so because this walk is cyclical, you will begin to repeat a lot of the things that you failed throughout your walk, and but repeating them with Torah makes it a lot easier to overcome those things. So just like they came to the bitter water and Yah was able to make that water sweet through obedience, the same thing is possible within this walk. Okay, so back to the Haggadah, the retelling, and that's the most liberating part of abuse, because the first thing taken away is your voice, of course. So I'm actually going to go back now and kind of like pull out some things that people had questions about while we go through this this phase. I also want to say I thank all the sisters who are participating and sharing their stories. I also want to let people know that what's shared on live does not translate over to the comments on the videos. So if you do share something, don't be alarmed of those things obviously being put out like permanently to the rest of the world. I wouldn't even share the video if that was the case. Let me go back a little bit further. One of the sisters mentioned unrecording what's recorded in our subconscious. And, you know, one of the things that I've felt like has been difficult is that unrecording process, because when things are placed into our minds, so many things become attached to that, and so many behaviors become attached to that. One of the things that a friend of mine shared was the idea of pulling out roots. And it's definitely more of a symbolic process than it is a actual physical process. But when we enter into relationships or when we experience trauma, roots begin to grow. So if you think of it as like your brain being the place it enters, roots begin to grow and they begin to take root into your body. And if you know anything about gardening, roots begin to intertangle into things, and good roots can also intertangle into bad roots. And so in the process of pulling out the weed plant that has grown into our bodies because of trauma, we will begin to rip and tear at things that are positive. And a lot of us have experienced that in relationships, where when we try to heal from trauma, it can sometimes tear up good relationships that we have. And somebody said it can also impact your health. That is very, very much true. So much of what happens in the mental affects the physical, and also so much that it happens in the spiritual affect the mental and the physical. So the process was literally like, as you're searching and meditating, instead of trying to pull out the whole plant at a time, sometimes it's imperative to untangle the roots as well. And finding those small things that are easily removed removes the entangling, so that when you have to remove the big hurt, it makes it an easier process and less things are ripped. So we'll actually can go through that at the end of this, and just go through that process of that meditation and forgiveness of self and others, and not forgiveness in the sense of a Christian forgiveness, but forgiveness that releases the burden of guilt from us and places it fully on the other person, so that Yah can exact judgment onto that person. And I'm going to restate that because I kind of went into that quickly. Forgiveness of someone for an action does not mean excusing that action. It means fully holding the person accountable for that action, because so many times people say, you need to just forgive. You need to just forgive. You need to move on. And that's not Hebraic forgiveness. Forgiveness is literally removing the burden from off of me and placing it fully on the other person. Okay? I just wanted to make that clear, because I didn't want to have anybody think that that I was saying that we forgive people who do things that like that to children or to ourselves. The leaving of scars. And okay, scars and silencing. Okay, I'm looking through and just pulling out a couple of things. One of the sisters asked, is it possible to heal both parties? And the healing process has to be voluntary. It really does, because and they also have to know, like, there are times when you can be in a relationship and you can kind of know that something wasn't right, but to dig into pry at that can only make the person further shut down. It really has to come through prayer and fasting. And fasting really does reveal a lot of things that are not always dealing with trauma in the sexual sense, but just trauma in the mental sense as well. Like recently this year, myself and my husband began fasting together on a more on a schedule, and it really showed us, one, how we can support each other, and also it really brought a lot of things to the surface, because there are things that fasting does, not only physically but also spiritually, that cause you to be more in tune with your body. That is where fasting comes in. I know people use fasting as magic, but really what fasting does, by removing the physical needs from the things that your body physically needs, like food and sometimes, you know, water or whatever, it allows you to focus on yourself, because a lot of what we don't do is focus on ourselves, because we've been told that that is selfish. But when you're not eating, you focus on everything that has to do with your body. One of the benefits of being a woman that a man does not have is that our body naturally goes through a cleansing and a fasting process when we have our cycle. And so we are constantly confronted with the things that happen to us, literally almost like once a month. If you really start surveying when your body goes through its emotional changes during your cycle, you're constantly focusing on that. Do I dry fast? Yes, sometimes I dry fast. It just depends on the weather conditions a lot of the times. Dry fasting, if I'm understanding you correctly, is when you don't have food or water. I dry fast during, my brain is drawing a blank, during Yom Kippur or during Day of Atonement, for sure. Obviously you prepare leading up into that, but yes, I do dry fast at times too. But as women, we enter into phases where we are going through that cleansing process on a regular, and so we're constantly being triggered, but we are told to hate our cycles, which thus makes it hard for us to heal. Because had we been told how to heal during our cycles, we would not be carrying this womb trauma over and over and over again. I saw something up here. This one, being approached by your child molester. So actually, that's a really good one. When you don't share your narrative and when you don't tell your family something, you hold your family accountable for things that they do not know. Right. You hold your family accountable for something they don't know. So let's say you have a family member who is your molester, but you haven't told your family. And let's say that you're the only person that has happened to within your family with that particular person. That person will be allowed to continually come around because you didn't use your voice. And thus creating situations that are uncomfortable for you and also for your family. So one of the things that I recommend is, if that is the case, is to immediately say something so that that person can be removed, or so that you know now to remove yourself if your family is not supportive of your healing process. What else? And all the healing processes are not the same. We all heal differently, and that is so true. That is so true. Some things cause deeper scars for others of us, and some of those ways are perpetuated differently. For people treating you the same, it might be trying to change the people that you're around. Because sometimes a part of healing is removing ourselves from the environments in which our hurt has taken place, and also being away. Sometimes there is a time for isolation, and I don't mean isolation so that you are depressed and you don't leave your place, but isolation in the sense that, like, to experience life a different way outside of the system that you were in. It was family, and I told before that we just happened to be the same. Okay, yeah, I've had in that similar situation where you're in the same place at the same time. That is very, very triggering. I actually had that happen to me as an adult, and the person had gotten older and had children and actually had daughters, and it was very, very difficult for me to think and see that and wonder, like, was that probably a turning point, but not really saying anything, and I haven't seen that person since. How do you from dreams about molestation of some sort? So the dream part, for me, I think a lot of purging while you're woke helps with that dream process. The stuff that we release from our mental will then be released from our subconscious as well, our subconscious when we're asleep. But also what we're watching and triggers, back to that triggers, like what's triggering those dreams. Something had to happen to open that compartment so that those things are happening. Prayer. I know that sounds very, very shallow, but if you know that you experience those kind of dreams, prayer either before and even after those dreams, about those things being allowed to be released in your subconscious is very important. It really, really needs to be entered or addressed through a lens of prayer, because prayer is also meditation, and prayer is also judgment for those thoughts. I also want to bring out something. I don't know if any other parents experience this, but having to think about that happening to your children is something that was really made me not want to have children. And even after I had children, it was something that would occur in my mind and make me very, very paranoid about having my children around people. And so that also, like dealing with those thoughts, I learned later that it wasn't me just being crazy, but I actually talked to a doctor and a pediatrician that it is actually the natural response that parents are supposed to have to trauma, even if you haven't experienced trauma. Literally, you relive it so that you know how to react. And so being in a place where you can rationalize and begin to protect your children is healthy. So I don't ever want people to think that not having those thoughts of that or how to protect their children in those situations is unhealthy. I saw something. One of the things we see at last week, because I see a lot of things with family and family not supporting the healing process, is that all family, the family that you're born to is not always your family. And I know that's tough because we are so attached to the people that we were given at birth. But so often we find that the people who are in our families don't reflect the family of Yah. And so the verse that stood out to me the most with that was when the Hamashiach goes, the people who are my family, are my brothers and sisters, are those who keep the will of Yah. And that's so important because those are the only people, and I'm talking about real people. I'm not talking about fake people who are pretending or making up rules for this walk, but I mean real people that you encounter. Those are your people because they share the same values and they share the same protection of you, and they care about your emotional and spiritual healing. People who do not care about the full you are not your family. If they just care about your physical, if they just care about what you can bring to the relationship, if they only care about how you look, if they only care about your status, that's not your family. Your family cares about your physical, your mental, and your spiritual health. And that is very important to know and remember. So I have a question about a person who's taking care of their elderly father. And honestly, so much of our guilt comes from honoring our parents. But part of honoring is also the idea of not provoking your children to wrath. And provoking your children to wrath meaning like not supporting and protecting your children. Even though her father has dementia, it could be a little late for the healing process. But if it's in the earlier stages, that needs to be a conversation. And it needs to be brought to his attention because he could also, he needs to fix that before he dies, because I think for your friend it would be even more traumatizing to carry that burden with that person dead and not ever resolving it. I don't believe you can ever be too overprotective of your children. I just don't. I'm one of those parents that probably is overprotective. I think about my kids constantly. And so it depends on how you act that out. If that's considered too overprotective, meaning like blaming people is a little far, even if they haven't done anything, or thinking things that have not actually happened, and treating people like that is it. But at the same time, there is a fine line between preventative care of your children and having to be overprotective. So as a parent, I don't think anybody should comment on how a person chooses to guard their children from things. I just don't. Sorry. Yeah, the mother lioness thing kicks in. Overdrive, extreme overdrive. Single parents. My mom was a single parent for a really long time, and my mom was super protective. My mom, I don't remember being able to spend the night at friends' houses. People could spend the night with us, but other people couldn't spend the night. Also, I want to bring out the fact that it's not always adults that are participating in molestation and rape of children, women, men in general, but it's also other children who have had those behaviors, who have had those behaviors brought upon them. So I want to bring out the fact that, like, if you need to be really, really close to the parents of the children you let come over your home, that's something that me and my husband definitely are very careful about. Our daughters are very well protective. What did he say? Where is he? I think I'm in love with you too, and I don't even know you. Leaving comments on all on this post. Oh, that's so sweet. So sweet. He made me blush. You see it? Look, literally, I'm turning red. He just swerved all in my lane. Anyways, just taking care of your children and having conversations with your spouse in order to protect your children. I cannot stand him. Like, yeah, particularly about sleepovers and other things. So I just wanted to put that out there. Last thing is the forgiveness of self. When we forgive ourselves and take ownership of our behaviors because of abuse, we are able to choose the good. And literally, by choose the good, I mean we have the right to turn our lives around at any moment. I believe that is the greatest gift in trauma that the Most High gives. The Most High does not carry, not only in trauma, but when we react to trauma. Because obviously, as a parent, if you know that your child is doing something because of what was done to them, the way you handle that child obviously is going to be differently than a child who is obviously just acting out in sexual promiscuity or in behaviors based upon whatever happened to them. So in the idea of repentance, what repentance means in this situation is to immediately choose the good. We have the right to turn our lives around at any moment. And I'm not talking about I'm going to get it right on Monday, I'm going to get it right on Tuesday, I'm going to get it right on Wednesday. When I get over this, I'm going to get it right. But we have the right at the moment that we decide we do not want to live in the shadow of trauma and oppression or suppression, whether it is physical abuse, mental abuse, or spiritual abuse that we've also received from religious circles, that we have the right to turn on at that moment. It's not what happens, but how we choose to live in it, rehearse it, and perpetuate it. So our job at this moment is to harness the now. It is to take advantage of the right now. So for many of us who are listening to this right now is the time to harness the now and to make a change for the good. We don't have to live in, perpetuate, or rehearse our abuse. At this moment right now, you have a voice, and you use that voice to stop the abuse, or you use your voice to remove yourself from the abuse and from families who cause you to live in the shadow of your abuse. And that is often difficult, but my husband is since he popped in, I'll use him. My husband is a very, very big supporter of change. And by change, I mean he is huge on, at this moment you can change to be different. At this moment, even if it's an attitude, okay, you're mad, but right now you can stop being mad. Or if it's a behavior, or if he's a very big on, yes, it's hard and yes, it's traumatizing, but you have the right to choose to change at that moment. And sometimes it's hard because change also introduces the unknown, which is something that we can deal with in our next talk, which is once we decide to make the change, what are the feelings we're going to experience once we decide to purge and move forward. And so that's where we'll stop. We're going to stop at harnessing the now. We're going to meditate for those of you who are looking to move forward, which I hope we all are. You're going to choose to meditate in what happened. I challenge you to deconstruct what happened. And as you're deconstructing what happened, choose the actions that you're going to take to move into the now. Because like I went back to the term Rapha, and I'll actually give that to you before I leave. It was Exodus 15:26, and the term for heal is Rapha, and it literally means to make whole, to make healthy, and it comes from Yah downward. But we also have to be part of healing is admitting that you need to be healed. And it means the healing of hurt nations, and it involves being restored of individual distress and also national distress as a nation. It literally has to do with a person and a nation, and it literally means bringing about wholeness to those hurts and defects. And so as we begin to heal individually, each one of us that heals also brings about the healing of the nations, healing of our nation as a collective. And so when we think about giving up our hurts and our offenses and perpetuating behaviors because of this, what we're doing is we're bringing healing to our whole nation, one at a time, one person at a time. And believe me, it trickles down. As women heal, we begin to heal our men. And as we get a voice, we stop perpetuating abuse from men, which also allows them to see their mistakes and to heal. And eventually it leads into the healing of our children. And then obviously that is our whole nation as a collective. So I appreciate everyone who joined and participated in this. So next time we will focus on harnessing the now, and once all those things have been surfaced, how to move forward and what are the positive intents that we need to have to move forward as a nation and in healing our people. Okay, I guess I'm gonna find my husband now since he's all on the stream. I think he misses me. All right, see you guys later. Shalom, shalom.